You're going to meet people who test your patience, people who think being loud makes them right, people who mistake your kindness for weakness. And here's the truth, not everyone's going to respect you, but that doesn't mean you stop respecting yourself. Let's talk about 5 ways to handle people who disrespect you. Not to win an argument, not to clap back, but to stay rooted in who you are, even when someone else is losing their grip on who they are. First, pause before reacting. That disrespect they just threw your way, that's bait, and you don't need to take it. When you pause, you interrupt the pattern, you take back the power because they want a reaction, not a response. So give them nothing to feed off of. Let your calm become the loudest thing in the room. Second, call it out calmly. You don't have to be rude to be clear. You can say, that comment didn't sit right with me, or I prefer respectful conversations. You're not asking for permission to be respected. You're reminding them of your standard. And when you say it with composure, it lands even deeper because you're showing strength without volume. Third, don't explain your worth, not to someone who's trying to reduce it. When you start justifying yourself to someone who doesn't value you, you've already given them more space than they've earned. Let your actions, your boundaries, your silence speak. Sometimes the most powerful move is no defense at all. Fourth, set boundaries, then enforce them. A boundary is not a suggestion, it's a line. If someone continues to cross it, you step back. You don't need to argue. You don't need to announce your exit. You just stop giving them access to parts of you they've proven they can't handle. Fifth, protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. You don't owe everyone your energy, especially not those who disrespect it. The more you protect your peace, the more you attract people who respect it too, and the less tolerance you have for those who don't. Let me tell you something. Respect starts with you, not them. How you hold yourself, how you respond, how you protect your space, that's the standard you set. And the people who belong in your life will rise to meet it. You don't have to match their disrespect to prove a point. You can stay kind, stay calm, stay clear, and still hold your ground. Because strength isn't loud, and dignity doesn't shout, it just walks away when it needs to. With its head high and its peace intact, disrespect isn't always loud. A lot of the time it shows up in quiet ways, ways that are easy to brush off, but slowly chip away at your sense of value if you let them. People often think of disrespect as yelling, insults, or open confrontation, but more often it's subtle. It's someone constantly interrupting you while you speak. It's sarcasm disguised as a joke that doesn't quite feel like one. It's eye rolling, dismissive tones being left out of conversations or having your contributions ignored. And because it's subtle, it can be confusing. You start wondering, am I overthinking this? Or maybe I'm just being too sensitive. But those gut feelings you get, that little knot that tightens when something feels off, they're there for a reason. And the worst part is when disrespect is subtle, people can easily deny it. They'll say, I was just kidding, or don't be so dramatic. This gaslighting is what keeps you stuck, second guessing yourself instead of standing up for yourself. The first step in handling this kind of disrespect is recognizing it for what it is. Not every jab is obvious. Not every slight is direct, but that doesn't make it any less real. You don't need someone to curse you out to feel disrespected. Emotional intelligence is about picking up on patterns. Is there someone who constantly makes you feel small but never says anything technically wrong? Do you walk away from interactions with certain people feeling drained, irritated, or invisible? Those are clues. That's the body's way of telling you that something isn't sitting right. And when you constantly ignore those clues, you slowly train yourself to accept behavior you shouldn't. Subtle disrespect is often a test. People want to see what they can get away with. If you laugh it off once, they'll do it again. If you stay silent, they'll assume it's fine. But it's not about overreacting. It's about knowing your limits and naming them. You don't need to explode. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to notice. Because once you notice, you can choose how to respond. And in that moment, you take your power back. Some people use subtle disrespect as a strategy. They want to poke at you without taking responsibility. They want to unsettle you while still looking composed. But you don't have to play their game. You don't have to call them out publicly or make a scene. All you have to do is hold on to your awareness. You can say, I noticed that, either to yourself or to them, depending on the moment. The point is, you don't let it slide past your radar, because what goes unacknowledged gets repeated. And the more you let subtle disrespect slide, the more you start doubting your own voice. Recognizing it, no matter how small, is the first form of self-respect. It's not about confrontation. It's about clarity. It's about saying to yourself, that wasn't okay, even if no one else sees it. Your reaction teaches people how to treat you. That's not just a catchy phrase. It's a principle that shows up in every relationship, every interaction, every boundary you either protect or allow others to step over. When someone disrespects you and you react with emotional outbursts, shouting, or defensiveness, you're teaching them that they can pull you out of your calm, out of your clarity, out of yourself. But when you respond instead of react, when you take a breath, pause, and choose your words, you're not just protecting your peace, you're also resetting the tone of the entire conversation. This isn't about being passive or silent. It's about being intentional. When someone disrespects you and you keep your composure, you're sending a very clear message. I don't lose my balance because you lost yours. That's strength. That's emotional control. And emotional control doesn't mean you don't feel hurt, disappointed, or angry. It means you don't hand those emotions over to the person who just disrespected you. You hold on to them long enough to process them. You stay grounded enough to respond in a way that protects your dignity. People pay attention to what gets a reaction. If every time someone is sarcastic toward you, you get visibly upset or try to over-explain yourself, you're unintentionally showing them where your soft spots are. Some people, especially the ones who thrive on control, will use that information. Not because you deserve it, but because it gives them a sense of power. And the moment they know how to press your buttons, they'll do it again and again, not always out of cruelty, but often out of habit. This is why calm is powerful. It teaches people, I don't respond to manipulation. I don't match energy. I manage mine. It doesn't mean you accept the disrespect. It means you deal with it in a way that reflects your values, not their mood. It means you're choosing self-respect over self-defense, because when you constantly defend, explain, or justify yourself to someone who has already decided to dismiss you, you're wasting emotional energy on a closed door. A better use of that energy, protecting your boundaries and showing up in your truth. You can say something like, I'm not okay with the way that was said, or if this is going to continue, I'm stepping away. It's clear. It's calm. It doesn't invite more drama. It shuts it down. Every time you hold your ground without losing your cool, you reinforce your standards. And over time, people start to adjust. They either step up or step out, but you're not changing who you are for either outcome. You're just staying consistent, and consistency teaches people exactly what version of you they're going to get. The grounded, steady one who doesn't need to shout to be heard and doesn't need to prove anything to stay firm in what they know. Silence can be louder than shouting. It's one of those truths that feels counterintuitive at first, especially in a world that rewards volume, reactions, and fast responses. When someone disrespects you, your first instinct might be to defend yourself, to speak up quickly, to prove your point. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Not out of fear, not out of avoidance, but because your silence sends a message that doesn't need punctuation. It says, you're not worth the energy. It says, I see what you're doing and I'm choosing not to participate. That kind of silence, it carries weight. Disrespect often tries to pull you into performance. It invites you to get reactive, to stoop to the same level, to fight for your worth in a space that already decided not to honor it. But when you stay silent, when you don't match that energy, you flip the script. You take the fuel out of the fire, you give them nothing to push against. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're wise. Silence isn't the absence of strength. It's the presence of control. It's choosing peace over pointless noise. It's stepping back instead of stepping into a mess you didn't create. And silence doesn't mean you don't notice the disrespect. You see it clearly. You just don't give it more life than it already has. Because some people thrive off reaction. They don't want resolution. They want attention. They want drama. They want to feel powerful by getting under your skin. So when you go quiet, when you keep your expression calm and your voice steady or even withheld, they don't know what to do with that. It confuses them. It unsettles them because now they're left sitting with their own words, their own tone, their own behavior, and no distraction from your response. Silence gives space. Space for people to hear themselves, space for tension to deflate, space for you to decide your next move without pressure. Sometimes your silence is the mirror they need. It reflects their tone, their energy, their behavior back at them without you having to say a single word. It's like holding up a quiet truth and letting them feel the discomfort of it. and if they don't. That's information too. Not everyone is meant to be in your life. Not everyone deserves access to your voice, especially those who disrespect it. When used with intention, silence becomes a boundary in itself. It says, this conversation isn't respectful, so I'm not continuing it. It says, I value myself too much to argue for basic decency. And most importantly, it keeps you anchored because silence protects your energy. It buys you time. It shields you from saying something out of hurt or frustration that you might regret. It allows you to keep your dignity when someone else is trying to tear it down. And it reminds you that you don't need noise to be strong. You just need clarity. Boundaries are not walls, they're filters. That's a distinction many people miss. A wall shuts everything out. A filter lets the right things in while keeping the wrong things out. When someone disrespects you, it's not about immediately cutting them off or building emotional fortresses. It's about deciding what you will and won't allow into your mental and emotional space. Boundaries are not about punishment. They're about protection. They don't exist to control others. They exist to remind you of what you will and won't tolerate. And when you set them with clarity and consistency, they change everything. You don't set a boundary to make someone else behave differently. You set it so you know what you will do if they continue to cross the line. For example, if someone speaks to you in a condescending tone, your boundary isn't, you need to stop talking to me like that. Your boundary is, if this tone continues, I will end the conversation. That's the difference. One is a demand. The other is a decision, and you can't control people, but you can absolutely control your response. Boundaries give you that power back. They help you stop wasting energy trying to change people and start focusing on protecting your peace. And here's something important. People who benefit from you having no boundaries are the first to be upset when you start building them. Don't let that stop you. Their discomfort is not your guilt to carry. If someone truly respects you, they'll adjust. They may not like the boundary at first, but they'll honor it. If they don't, then the boundary did its job. It filtered them out. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And clarity is a form of care. You're not being cold or distant. You're being intentional with your space, your energy, and your presence. Boundaries don't require shouting, arguing, or dramatic exits. They just need consistency. You don't have to keep explaining yourself. You don't need 10 reasons or a long backstory. This doesn't work for me is enough. You don't owe more than that. People who are used to crossing your lines without consequence will test you. They'll push. They'll guilt trip. They'll question why you've changed. And that's okay. Growth often looks like distancing yourself from what once felt familiar, but was never truly safe. Boundaries also help you stay in integrity because when you don't have them, resentment builds. You start holding anger that was never voiced. You feel tension in places where clarity should have existed. Boundaries clear that fog. They help you show up with peace, not pressure, with presence, not pretense, because when you know your limits, you stop taking things personally. You stop making someone's poor behavior a reflection of your worth. Instead, you recognize it as data and you make decisions accordingly. Boundaries aren't about shutting people out. They're about inviting the right ones in and keeping yourself centered in the process. Don't trade your character for their chaos. When someone disrespects you, there's a temptation to match their energy, to meet rudeness with sarcasm, to answer aggression with more aggression, to prove that you won't be walked on. But here's the truth. Just because someone drags you into the mud doesn't mean you have to roll in it with them. Your strength isn't measured by how loud you get or how sharp your comeback is. It's measured by how little you let someone else pull you out of your values. People who operate from chaos want a reaction. They want to see you flinch, get defensive, explode, or feel small. Not necessarily because they hate you, but because it confirms their power in the moment. And when you give them that reaction, you validate their behavior. You hand them control over your emotions. That's not justice. That's self-sabotage. You don't rise by becoming like them. You rise by staying rooted in who you are, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because that's when character really shows up, not when things are calm, but when you're being provoked. It takes discipline to stay calm in the face of disrespect. It takes self-awareness to hold your tone, keep your words steady, and walk away if necessary. And that's not weakness, that's mastery. When you choose not to retaliate, not because you're scared, but because you're clear, you're teaching yourself and everyone around you that your peace isn't for sale, that your standards don't change based on someone else's mood. You're showing that you can be firm without being cruel, that you can stand up for yourself without tearing someone else down. Letting someone's chaos dictate your character is like letting a storm decide how you walk. You don't need to get swept up. You can ground yourself. You can say, That's not how I operate, and mean it. You can choose silence. You can choose a boundary. You can choose distance. And sometimes the most powerful move you can make is not reacting at all, because your lack of reaction doesn't mean you're okay with what happened. It means you're choosing to protect your energy from what's unworthy of it. Staying in your character doesn't mean you allow disrespect. It means you respond to it from a higher place. You still speak up. You still hold boundaries, but you do it without losing yourself in the process. You don't fight for your dignity. You walk in it. You don't demand respect. You carry yourself in a way that shows you expect it. And when someone can't meet you there, you don't lower yourself. You leave them where they are. Not because you're better, but because you're wiser, because you know who you are. And who you are doesn't change based on how someone else decides to act. You're not responsible for their behavior, only for your response. That's a hard truth to sit with, especially if you're someone who wants to keep the peace, avoid conflict, or make things right. But no matter how kind, patient, or understanding you are, people will still say things that hurt. They'll still cross lines. They'll still disrespect. And in those moments, you might feel like it's somehow your fault. Like maybe if you'd said it differently or stayed quieter or tried harder, things would have gone better. But that's not on you. People act from who they are, not who you are. What is on you, though, is how you respond. That's where your power lives. That's the line you get to draw. You don't get to choose how others behave, but you always get to choose whether or not you engage, whether or not you stoop to their level, whether or not you let their disrespect infect your peace. And that moment right there is where you either give your power away or you hold on to it. That split second after someone disrespects you, that's your choice. That's your chance to stay centered, even when everything in you wants to explode. Some people will try to make you feel like it's your job to manage their emotions, like you're responsible for how they feel or react. But you're not. You're responsible for your truth, your tone, your presence. That's it. You don't need to bend over backward to make someone comfortable, especially when they're being disrespectful. You don't have to explain your boundaries 10 times. You don't need to stay in conversations that don't honor you just to be polite. That's not maturity. That's self-betrayal. And here's where it gets even deeper. When you take responsibility for your response, you stop blaming others for your peace. You stop saying, they made me act like that, or if they hadn't said that, I wouldn't have lost it. No, you own it. You say, they did what they did, but I chose how I handled it. That kind of accountability isn't always easy, but it's freeing. It means you don't have to wait for someone else to change for you to feel grounded again. You don't have to wait for the apology to start healing. You don't have to wait for respect to act with self-respect. You become the thermostat, not the thermometer. You set the tone, you control the temperature, and when someone walks in with their storm, you don't absorb it. You stay steady, you hold your line, you keep your values intact because your peace doesn't belong to anyone else. It's yours to protect. And the more you protect it, the more you start to realize how much power you've had all along, not over other people, but over yourself. And that kind of control, that's what keeps you grounded. That's what makes you unshakable.